Who I am, like where I've been or what I used to be, is not important. Enough to know I've never been anywhere and returned empty-handed. I've made calls, and those calls have been returned, if you know what I mean. I have files people would die for. Maybe some have already. I'm a devotee of dishonorable data. I detect disgrace. I log lies. I bank bad behavior. And I scrutinize scandal. Then and now.
The name Fatty Arbuckle is synonymous with the St. Francis Hotel, the party, the Labor Day weekend, and the rape and murder of Virginia Rappe.
It was a party to end all parties. It was a celebration that became a celebration of horror because a young girl lost her life. A movie star was implicated, and the studios had to hold their breath.
Fatty was starring in a movie. It was a movie that took place in a courtroom in San Francisco. It was a movie that had 3 acts. It was a tragedy, not a comedy, and he was the leading victim.
In the summer of 1994, the world stopped as a celebrity scandal unfolded live on television. O.J. Simpson was cheered by his fans as he ran from the law. As a football legend, he parlayed his fame into a career as a successful actor, pitchman, and sports broadcaster. His celebrity status was dramatically reversed when he stood trial for the brutal murder of his ex-wife and her friend. Despite his acquittal, he is considered a pariah in the court of public opinion. The O.J. scandal was small change in comparison to the Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle scandal in the early 20s. It was the first celebrity scandal to rock Hollywood and the world. On September 3, 1921, the world's highest-paid actor, funny man Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, piled into his custom-built Pierce Arrow with 2 friends and headed up the coast. He was bigger than Charlie Chaplin, bigger than Buster Keaton, and had just completed 3 pictures for Paramount. Arbuckle now decided to celebrate at the renowned St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco.
They'd taken 3 rooms on the 12th floor. I think it's 1219, 1220, 1221. And they said, we're going to be here for a few days just to celebrate. The doors were open day and night, so anyone who was in town could go to Roscoe's rooms and have a few drinks. There was a lot of bootleg liquor. There was perpetual music. There was perpetual food. Now, attending the party, because she had heard about it, was a lady by the name of Virginia Rappe.
24-year-old struggling actress Virginia Rappe was one of several party guests who were dancing and drinking. Virginia was accompanied by her manager and a mysterious woman called Maud Delmont. What happened next would lead to the death of Virginia Rappe, the destruction of the career and reputation of Fatty Arbuckle, and a series of allegations that put Hollywood on trial. According to Maud Delmont, this is the way the party unfolded.
Virginia had left the room first, presumably to go to the bathroom. Arbuckle said, I'll be back in a few minutes, winked, left the room, closed the door, locked the door, and disappeared with Virginia.
And then Miss Delmont claimed that she heard a scream, that they banged on the door, and when they were finally let in, they found Virginia Rappe on the bed, screaming, I'm dying, Roscoe killed me.
They found a hysterical Rappe frothing at the mouth and clutching at her abdomen. She was tearing at her clothes and writhing in agony. After numerous failed attempts to revive Rappe, a hotel physician was called to the Arbuckle suite. The following morning, with Rappe under medical attention, Arbuckle promptly checked out of the St. Francis and returned to Los Angeles by steamship.
When Arbuckle left San Francisco, he took the steamer back to Los Angeles. In his mind, she was just sick, she was drunk, she was throwing up, oh, she'll be all right.
3 days later, at a private hospital, Virginia Rappe died of a ruptured bladder. Hearing this, Arbuckle returned to San Francisco with a studio lawyer.
Maud Delmont then signed a complaint against Fatty Arbuckle for murder of Virginia Rappe, and Fatty Arbuckle was placed under arrest.
It's hard to convey, perhaps today, the international significance of this trial. It was on the front page of every major newspaper in the world because Arbuckle was an international figure.
Roscoe Arbuckle, prior to the scandal, was the wealthiest, most popular man in motion pictures.
For millions of Arbuckle fans, it was hard to reconcile the image of Fatty, the movie star, with Roscoe, the murdering rapist.
This man was really the preeminent star. He was getting $1 million a year from Paramount. And he set standards for comedy that some say have never been reached since, for slapstick, for taking the pratfalls, and he did his own stunts.
He was very light on his feet. He was not clumsy. And he was very agile, and he was able to do all of these falls almost like a human beach ball.
On screen, he had an infectious personality. He was extremely good in conveying in the silent film acting style, the kind of comedic sense that he had. And he just had a screen presence which made him non-threatening. He always had a certain naivete associated with him, and he was always getting involved in things which were not really his fault. And I think from that point of view, everybody loved him.
The Arbuckle scandal occurred at a time of radical change. At the turn of the century, millions of immigrants landed on the shores of America. Among them, men like Adolf Zucker, founder of Paramount. These immigrants created Hollywood, and through their films they promoted the little guy, like Fatty Arbuckle, who made it to the top and married the boss's daughter. For the Protestant elite, this was no laughing matter.
The group who felt their status being threatened saw the movies as a potential for undermining all of the ideas that they had tried to instill in America, and most particularly moral ideas, ideas associated with sex, ideas associated with certain kinds of behavior.
Reformers, particularly church groups at this time, had been saying that motion pictures were evil, that the messages in movies were inciting people to crime and violence, that we should do away with movies, we should do away with Hollywood, because this is a place where movie stars are living these evil, sort of debauched lives.
According to the establishment, led by men like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, the upstart studio moguls such as Adolf Zucker, Louis B. Mayer of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and Carl Laemmle, head of Universal, had to be stopped. The Arbuckle case was made to order. Destroy Hollywood's star, and you bring down Hollywood.
Arbuckle was the biggest name around that they could certainly focus on. He handed them this opportunity on a platter, unfortunately, and they took it and turned it into a media circus, the likes of which had never been seen in this country before.
Newspapers in those days had 5, 6, 7 editions a day. And the screaming headlines, and the news vendors who would say, "Extra, extra, hear all about it." Their tagline would be, "The Fatty Arbuckle case."
The attack was scripted by newspaper baron William Randolph Hearst.
Hearst is everything that Orson Welles didn't tell us in Citizen Kane. He was a spoiled young man who came into a lot of money and used that money as a means of trying to capture the American public. He ran for the presidency and he failed at that. But through his newspapers, he became a major figure of significance.
Sometimes reality, particularly in Hollywood, is not nearly as important as perception. And the Hearst press really altered public perception in a way that was very interesting and very calculated.
Immediately after the scandal hit, Arbuckle turned into a monster. The newspapers had a great deal to do with this by associating his name with the worst crimes imaginable. Immediately, the public image, literally the visual image of Arbuckle, changes from the tumbling comedian to the vicious villain, the criminal behind bars.
Obviously, the Hearst papers, which had invented yellow journalism, could seize upon alleged details. And in fact, to this day, the alleged details of the rape and the use of a bottle, etc. So the most gory, gruesome details were first suggested in the newspaper. I mean, this was just the ultimate outer edge of sensational journalism.
The papers reported that the obese Arbuckle ruptured Rappe's bladder during a vicious rape assault, the sheer force of his 266-pound body causing the rupture. There was also public speculation that the drunken movie star, unable to get an erection, violated the young actress with a bottle. To one and all, Arbuckle passionately affirmed his innocence. From behind bars, Arbuckle got word to Adolf Zucker, claiming the charges against him were completely false. I'm not asking for sympathy or forgiveness. I have not done wrong, but I do want you and the ones financially as well as personally interested to know that I am innocent, a victim of circumstance, the only one of prominence in the party, and therefore, I had to be the goat. Although separated, Roscoe's wife Minta rushed to San Francisco in his defense and publicly trumpeted his innocence. Others were skeptical. Arbuckle's current box office hit was immediately pulled by cautious exhibitors, sparking a nationwide ban on all his films.
The studio reaction was quite horrible. Mr. Zucker was very, very upset because he had unreleased films that were going to be never seen again. Thousands and thousands of dollars were lost. Other movie stars were now worried that, are we going to be patrolled because of that slob? Are movies going to be considered now something immoral?
And so they began to fear that the whole industry would come under, first of all, federal regulation, which they saw as a terrible thing, and secondly, that the public's love affair, which was growing by leaps and bounds, would suddenly disappear.
Within 48 hours of Arbuckle's arrest, a coroner's inquest was conducted and a special grand jury was convened. Citing lack of evidence, the grand jury dismissed the rape charge, but ruled Arbuckle be tried for manslaughter. Back in Los Angeles, thousands of curiosity seekers filed past the open casket of Virginia Rappe. The woman who had been named Hollywood's best-dressed starlet was on display for the last time. Arbuckle's employer, Adolf Zucker, asked America's legal wizard, Clarence Darrow, to take on the case. When Darrow was unable to accept, the studio settled on Gavin McNabb, a prominent and skilled San Francisco attorney. But McNabb was unable to secure bail for Arbuckle.
Fatty Arbuckle soon found his new residence to be the top floor of the Hall of Justice in a jail cell, a very small, dirty, cramped, damp cell. He went from some of the best food and champagne to living on jailhouse stew and very weak coffee.
But Arbuckle was used to the margins of society. In fact, as Roscoe cooled his heels at the Hall of Justice, many now wondered whether there was anything in his past that would indicate he was capable of raping and killing a woman.
He was an abused child. His father constantly made fun of him because of his weight. He used to beat him up, call him fat boy, fatso.
Roscoe Arbuckle was born on a small Kansas farm in 1887. His alcoholic father left his wife and child when Fatty was a toddler. His mother died when Roscoe was just a kid. The family bundled him off to his father.
At the age of 12, Roscoe Arbuckle was left alone in a train station because his father never came to pick him up. In fact, his father left town when he heard that he was coming. He was a child alone in a train station with nobody to support him.
Taken in by a local hotel owner, Roscoe did odd jobs and performed on the hotel stage during amateur nights. He developed a vaudeville and stage act where he sang and tumbled for the audience. By the time he was 21, the seasoned Roscoe had toured the States, parts of Canada, even Asia. It was back in California that he met his future wife and fellow performer, Minta Durfee.
They were married by a justice of the peace. Everything was covered in the newspapers. In fact, they were married on stage at the theater where they were performing. This was a very big thrill for the audience because you were watching a real wedding.
In 1913, a broke and unemployed Arbuckle joined Canadian Max Sennett's Keystone Film Company. Earning $5 a day, Roscoe started as a Keystone cop.
The Arbuckle star rose very quickly. because people went to the movies every week. And it was a case of who was that fat, funny man. And by the third film, Arbuckle was a name to contend with.
Roscoe was paired with an unknown, talented vaudeville star named Charles Chaplin. Before Chaplin departed Keystone over a money dispute, they made 6 films together, including The Rounders, their last together. Movie mogul and pioneer Adolf Zucker recognized Arbuckle's talents and skyrocketing popularity. He signed him up for an unheard of $1 million a year.
It was more than Chaplin ever had signed for at that moment. And he was the highest paid motion picture star in films. He was given complete control of his pictures, complete script approval, complete cast approval. The distribution was at his approval. He was given more than any screen star had ever been given.
In just 6 years, Arbuckle had risen from a $5 a day extra at Keystone to running his own company and making $3,000 a day. Under pressure to play the Hollywood game, Roscoe purchased a custom-built Pierce Arrow and a $250,000 mansion in Los Angeles. Roscoe Arbuckle was at the height of his fame and popularity. He seemed unstoppable until the deadly party at the St. Francis Hotel. In 1921, the trial of Roscoe Arbuckle, labeled the trial of the century, was hosted by San Francisco. It was then a conservative city.
The Arbuckle case was a way of showing the world that no vulgar Hollywood person is going to use our cultured city as a depraved playground. They were going to get the record straight. The person who wanted to get the record straight was District Attorney Mr. Brady.
It was up to D.A. Matthew Brady to take Hollywood down, and with it, its reigning star, Roscoe Arbuckle. Through the media, he quickly established himself as the defender not only of San Francisco's morals, but the nation's.
And one of the things that Brady did was he played a technique known as the plain folks technique, where he said, I'm just a plain old DA with very little resources at hand, and I'm fighting this Hollywood legend with millions of dollars who's going to, just like all of those Hollywood folks, buy their way out of this trial.
Eager to put the scandal and negative publicity behind them, Zucker pushed defense attorney McNabb for a speedy trial. D.A. Brady was only too happy to oblige.
On the first day of trial, it was a chaotic scene. It was a media circus. There were 100 policemen detailed to keep the peace. There were thousands of people that were clamoring to get into the small courtroom. It was just chaos.
On Friday, November 18th, 1921, the jury heard for the first time the details of District Attorney Matt Brady's version of the events that led to the death of Virginia Rappe. It was based on Maud Delmont's sworn affidavit. After receiving an invitation, the trio of Maud Delmont, Virginia Rappe, and her manager rolled into the party where Arbuckle was holding court. He was drinking heavily and intoxicated. At one point, Arbuckle and Rappe left the room and disappeared behind door 1219. An hour later, a concerned Maud in search of Virginia began hammering on the door of Arbuckle's room. The door remained locked, and party guests soon heard screaming. Maud called the hotel manager. When he showed up, Arbuckle finally opened the door. They found Virginia Rappe lying on the bed, screaming and tearing at her clothes. Guests heard her yell, I'm hurt, I'm dying, Roscoe killed me. Everyone but Arbuckle seemed worried about her condition. Virginia was eventually moved down the hall to room 1227. The hotel physician, Dr. Beardsley, arrived and gave Rappe an injection to calm her down. Maud declared that Arbuckle had lain on Virginia and crushed her. Virginia confirmed this. After 3 days of medical attention by 3 different doctors, Virginia Rappe died in a local hospital.
What you had here was something beyond William Randolph Hearst's wildest dreams. You didn't just have a man accused of sexual assault. You had a great, big, fat man accused of sexual assault. You had a young, slender, beautiful woman. The only thing that would have made it better if she'd been blonde and had corkscrew curls like Mary Pickford. but you had the kind of contrast that early film melodrama thrived upon.
In my opinion, once the alleged details of the alleged rape, these horrific details were released, Fatty Arbuckle was finished.
The defense was now eager to strike back. A somewhat different version of the events began to emerge. Several witnesses revealed that before the hotel's physician arrived, party guests had attempted to revive the injured Rappe.
First thing they did was they gave that young woman bicarbonate of soda, which they promptly got to see again as it came right back up and entertained one and all. They thought a reasonable method of quelling her hysteria would be to lift her upside down by her ankles and hang her that way. In addition to the other charming, eccentric, homegrown remedies that were administered to Virginia Rappe that afternoon in that hotel suite at the St. Francis, she was dunked into a large cold tub of water.
On his attorney's advice, Roscoe had maintained his silence. After weeks of lurid stories and public condemnation, Roscoe finally took the stand.
Perhaps the most significant aspect of the first trial was that this was the first time that Fatty Arbuckle had had an opportunity to tell his side of the story.
Arbuckle testified that he went into Suite 1219 to change into his clothes for a prearranged drive. Entering the bathroom to wash up, he discovered a drunken Virginia Rappe kneeling on the floor, vomiting. He assisted Rappe, cleaned her up, and helped her to a bed. Roscoe returned to the washroom, and when he came back into the suite, he discovered that Virginia was lying on the floor in agony. He helped the fully clothed Rappe back onto the bed, where she continued to vomit and moan. Contrary to Maud Delmont's allegations, Roscoe testified that he immediately summoned help.
His testimony was consistent throughout. They never caught him in any major inconsistencies. And he came across as a very sincere, likable person. I think the jury liked him.
In addition to that, he was able to withstand for hours the cross-examination of the district attorney who tried to tear his story to shreds.
The key issue during the trial was how the bladder of Virginia Rappe had ruptured.
Maud Delmont's assertion and Mr. Brady, the DA's assertion, that Roscoe Arbuckle somehow in laying on top of this woman or sexually assaulting her ruptured her bladder is very unlikely medically.
For the defense, doctors testified that it was unlikely that Roscoe could have burst Virginia's bladder. Instead, they suggested that the various first aid remedies administered by the party guests may have been responsible. Rappe herself, when she fell out of bed or vomited, could have caused the rupture.
After the closing remarks of both the prosecutor and the defense, and the instructions by the judge to the jury, which took some time to read, the jury departed for their deliberations.
Only one verdict could save Roscoe Arbuckle and Hollywood. After a 17-day trial, Roscoe Arbuckle awaited the jury's decision and his fate.
The jury went into the deliberation room and deliberated for approximately 40 hours. After that time, they informed the judge that they were unable to come to a unanimous verdict.
10 jurors thought Arbuckle was innocent, but 2 were convinced of his guilt.
And eventually the foreman of the jury went to the judge and said, "There's nothing we can ever agree on, period. This is going to be a lasting holdout," at which point the judge had to declare a mistrial, hung jury, and they went on to the next one from there.
In spite of the fact that the jury had voted 10-2 on acquittal, the newspapers continued to attack Fatty Arbuckle and the image of Hollywood, and they never let up.
Louis B. Mayer, head of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, said that this can kill motion pictures, that this can be the ruin of Hollywood, that thousands of people are going to be out of work because one man did not know how to control his desires.
Adolf Zucker and the other movie moguls were also very upset with the verdict. because what they needed was an acquittal in order to save Hollywood.
With cries of censorship ringing in Washington and yet another messy public trial on the horizon, the stakes were now considerably higher. If Hollywood was to survive, reasoned the moguls, Fatty had to be thrown overboard. Adolf Zukor cut off his salary and canceled his contract.
Suddenly, Arbuckle was no longer an asset, he was a liability. He was someone now that you would perpetually associate, well, isn't he that fat man with that girl in the room? Well, now they could say he doesn't work here anymore. We got rid of him. We've cleaned house.
They didn't stop there. With Fatty at arm's length, the immigrant moguls were now able to outmaneuver Hearst and the old boys club he represented. They banded together and hired Will Hays to head up Hollywood's own censor board, called the Motion Picture Producers Association. As a Washington insider, Hays, a Protestant prince, was the perfect frontman to fight federal censorship.
If you would look for any figure who could better epitomize the evangelical Protestant upright Midwesterner, the Mid-American who's beginning to cast a suspicious eye on Hollywood, Will Hays would be your man.
You want entertainment, wholesome, interesting, and vital. This, the motion picture industry, is pledged to provide.
Will Hays' appointment as industry watchdog was officially announced on January 11, 1922, the day Arbuckle's second trial got underway. Maud Delmont, who never testified in the first trial, suddenly found herself under arrest on a charge of bigamy. District Attorney Matthew Brady was now in a tremendous hole.
She was to be the state's star witness, but in fact, she was so unreliable and lacked credibility to such a degree that they never put her on the stand.
Maud Delmont was probably one of the most interesting characters in this whole scenario. Maud Delmont, who had a reputation of being basically a madam, she would supply girls, hopeful young starlets for these Hollywood parties that were in San Francisco.
Maud Delmont had been arrested and, on numerous occasions. She had at least 50 outstanding charges lodged against her. She had a reputation as being an extortionist. She had a reputation of being a bigamist and a blackmailer.
In the first trial, D.A. Brady had relied on party guest Zay Prevon to corroborate Maud Delmont's version of the party. In the second trial, Prevon not only recanted her original testimony, but accused Brady of coercion.
He took her bodily, had her taken to the home of an assistant district attorney, and had her imprisoned for a period of approximately 7 weeks. Matt Brady claimed that what he was trying to do was to keep the defense attorneys and investigators from tampering with his witness. But in essence, what he was doing was trying to coerce her and threaten her into making the statements that he wanted her to make that would corroborate the testimony made by Maud Delmont at the coroner's inquest.
As it turned out, Matthew Brady had adopted even more extreme measures on prosecution witness Alice Blake.
Alice Blake had a daughter, and a young daughter, a minor, and Matt Brady threatened that if Alice Blake did not testify in the manner that he asked her to, that he would make sure that that child was taken away from Alice.
And it's like a prosecutor either with a vengeance or an agenda. And clearly the agenda was known to everybody. Matt Brady wanted the publicity from this trial to launch him into the governorship. I think the hiding of the witnesses and then their disappearance from the trial scene is something that is so shocking that in today's generation, Matt Brady not only would not be elected governor, but probably wouldn't finish his term as district attorney. I mean, how far do you have to go?
The prosecution's case was in tatters. A man was innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Clearly, Brady had failed miserably. So Arbuckle's attorney, Gavin McNabb, made a tactical error by deciding that no defense was necessary.
In addition to that, Attorney McNabb made even a bigger mistake, and that was he did not give a closing statement. Unbelievable.
McNabb just lay down almost as to laugh or mock the prosecutor and say, "You haven't put on a case. Why should I dignify your presentation with anything from me?"
The jury was now out. It took 3 days and 13 ballots before they returned to the courtroom. While Roscoe waited for the jury's decision, Adolf Zucker waited as well. For Zucker, it was clear Hollywood could not afford a third trial. If Arbuckle wasn't fully exonerated, Zucker would have to officially ban Fatty's films. After all, Britain and Switzerland had already banned his films, and delegates to the League of Nations were blaming Arbuckle for an increase in white slavery. It seemed like the world was waiting for the verdict.
The jurors took the fact that Fatty Arbuckle had not testified and that Attorney McNabb had not made a closing statement as a sign of weakness. And as a result, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict, but were hung with a 10-2 verdict for guilt.
As the trials went on, it became more damaging both to the studio and Fatty Arbuckle. But in today's world, a studio might try to turn that around in its favor and stand behind him. In those days, he was already, in effect, convicted by just the charge itself.
Only 2 votes away from a manslaughter conviction confirmed for the studio that Arbuckle was finished. Meetings between Zucker and Hayes took place with a view to officially ban Arbuckle's films forever. Smelling blood, the prosecution moved in for the kill.
The third trial begins on March 13th, 1922, and the defense realizes we are going to have to pull out all the stops.
Defense attorney McNabb was concerned that D.A. Brady could convince a jury of Arbuckle's assault on Rappe with a bottle if he could suggest that Fatty was impotent.
The marriage of Roscoe Arbuckle and Minta Arbuckle was very sad. Minta would say, he slept away from me. The gulf between us physically became the gulf between us emotionally, because Roscoe was unable to sexually perform. He was not a lover, and she said he just couldn't. He was that self-conscious about his body out of clothing that he was afraid I would laugh. And I asked her, did you ever laugh? And she said, not in the bedroom. She said he just was very inadequate.
Rather than wait for Brady to expose Fatty's sexual history, McNabb took the risky road of attacking the victim's past. McNabb had to provide a plausible alternative to the assault scenario. He had to suggest that Virginia Rappe's burst bladder could have been caused by sexually transmitted infections, or even a pregnancy gone wrong.
They brought out the fact that Virginia Rappe's reputation was very poor.
She was a big drinker, and after she would have a few drinks, she would begin tearing her clothes off. Long before she met Roscoe Arbuckle, and long before this party, she was known for doing this.
She had a prior history of cystitis, which is a medical term for inflammation of the bladder, infection of the bladder. In the days before antibiotics, this was common. She would scream, she would clutch, she would tear off her clothes, and she in general would put on a pretty good show.
They brought out the fact that during the time that she was a Hollywood actress, that she also was a prostitute.
She started having abortions at the age of 14. Before she was 16, she had had 5 abortions. She had had a child out of wedlock at the age of 16. She had multiple episodes of sexually transmitted diseases.
McNabb now went after Maud Delmont, the complainant whose testimony appeared regularly in the newspapers but never in court. McNabb had to establish that Delmont had both motive and opportunity to go after Arbuckle.
On the afternoon of Wednesday, September 7th, instead of working to get her sick friend into a hospital or onto an operating room table, Maud Delmont did something very curious. She sent telegrams to 2 attorneys in San Diego and Los Angeles, both with the same text. We have Roscoe Arbuckle in a hole here. chance to make some money out of him.
We must remember that Virginia Rappe or Rappe did not die immediately. So there was a few days when there were lots of machinations going on, and by the later accounts, Mrs. Delmont was trying to manipulate quite a bit of money out of Mr. Arbuckle.
At approximately the same time as she sent these 2 telegrams, she removed Virginia Rappe's torn clothing from the Arbuckle hotel room and kept it as presumed documentation of the supposed sexual assault.
It was now time to pull out all the stops and put Roscoe back on the stand, hoping that the man who had won the hearts of millions would connect with the 12 men and women of the jury and overcome his public image as a monster.
A man like Fatty Arbuckle works an audience, charms an audience, but in this case, with his life on the line, his career on the line, he still was a human. And he spoke to them in that kind of way. And the message they received from him, in addition to the fact there was no evidence to tie him in to doing anything cruel, the jury linked with him.
On April 12th, with the prosecution's case dismembered, defense attorney Gavin McNabb made his closing argument to the jury. He attacked Delmont, calling her the witness who had never witnessed. He attacked the DA who had coerced witnesses, and he asked for a full exoneration of his client, former funny man Fatty Arbuckle. That afternoon, for the 3rd time on this case, 12 jurors filed out of the courtroom. As they were deciding Arbuckle's fate, they didn't know that the real criminal activity probably began after Roscoe left and the hotel's doctor got involved. The jury in Arbuckle's 3rd trial couldn't have known that the focus of the trial should not have been the Hollywood star, but seemingly minor characters in this story, beginning with the hotel's physician, Dr. Beardsley.
He gave her morphine, which masks the findings and the symptoms. It makes your abdominal exam of little value. He later stated that he recognized that this patient had an acute abdomen. An acute abdomen is a physician-specific term for an abdomen that requires surgery, a surgical abdomen. And yet, he did nothing about it. He did not admit her to the hospital. He did not call in a surgeon. He did not attempt to make a diagnosis. He simply continued to give her morphine.
At 5 a.m. Tuesday morning, Virginia Rappe was once again in severe pain. Maud Delmont summoned Dr. Beardsley, who administered a 3rd injection of morphine and performed a procedure which may have contributed to her death.
He inserted into her bladder what was described by Maud Delmont as the largest glass catheter she had ever seen in her life. A hard, fixed, non-flexible piece of glass. It is entirely possible that the catheter went straight through Virginia Rappe's diseased, infected bladder and right into her peritoneum, rupturing the bladder at that moment.
Virginia Rappe, after being moved to a private women's hospital, died 4 days after the party while under the care of a Dr. Romwell.
Dr. Romwell's behavior in the period around Miss Rappe's death is curious, to say the least. Number one, the night before her death, it was clear that they either had to operate or she would die. They elected not to operate. They continued to give morphine. They essentially condemned her to die of this process. And 90 minutes before her death, they were making arrangements for an illegal autopsy. The coroner's office was not consulted. Approval was not given. I don't think she had cooled before they were slicing her open to see what had happened.
The findings of the autopsy revealed Rappe had a ruptured bladder, which was diseased. She also suffered from gonorrhea, which, left undiagnosed, can complicate a pregnancy. In fact, Rappe was pregnant. Curiously, all her reproductive organs were not only removed, but destroyed. This would make sense if a botched and illegal abortion had been performed, or if complications due to a pregnancy gone wrong had been overlooked.
I would argue that what we have here is not a criminal case of a beloved fat man committing sexual assault and manslaughter, but a case of criminal malpractice and well-documented efforts to cover it up.
After only 6 minutes of deliberations, the jury in the third trial came back with the verdict. As the jurors took their seats, the judge asked whether they had reached a decision. There was a long moment of silence.
And they did something that was unheard of at the time. I don't think it's ever been repeated in a courtroom. They stood up and announced a verdict of not guilty, but then they read a public statement.
Acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle, they said. Quote, "We feel that a great injustice has been done him. We feel also that it was only our plain duty to give him this exoneration under the evidence, that there was not the slightest proof adduced to connect him in any way with the commission of a crime. We wish him success and hope that the American people will take the judgment of 14 men and women who have sat listening for 31 days to the evidence that Roscoe Arbuckle is entirely innocent and free from all blame."
The worst irony, I think, for Roscoe Arbuckle was that at the end of 3 arduous trials, when he finally achieved not only acquittal, he achieved an overwhelming exoneration. That was when the boom fell. Mr. Hayes, in the name of motion picture decency, bans him from the screen.
The exhibitors, the important people who are on ground zero out there, are writing in letters saying, no way can Fatty Arbuckle come back into the industry. And that is, I think, where Hayes takes his cue, is that he was backed by the people who were putting the movies on every night for their audiences.
Hayes may have been backed by the theater owners, but the real push came directly from the moguls, specifically Paramount's Adolph Zukor.
Will Hayes' decision to ban the Arbuckle films was unfair, I believe, but I also think that if he hadn't officially banned the films, the studio heads wouldn't have permitted Arbuckle to star in any movies. They knew that he would be what they call box office poison.
Professionally ruined and financially bankrupt from a legal tab of almost $1 million, Roscoe was forced to sell his assets, including his prized automobiles and his Hollywood mansion. Banned from the screen, Arbuckle worked sporadically on the stage and behind the camera, directing under his father's name, William B. Goodrich, or Will Be Good for short. Ironically, Arbuckle accepted a job from one of his most severe critics.
He could not get any work in front of the camera, and he went to Mr. Hearst, and he said to Mr. Hearst, who had offered him a job directing Hearst's girlfriend, Marion Davies, in a film called The Red Mill, he said, "Mr. Hearst, why are you hiring me? You did everything you could to convict me. You had several editions a day of your paper in which you accused me of everything that I didn't do. Why are you offering me a job?" And Mr. Hearst said, "Roscoe, I don't care what they said you did. I just want to sell papers. That's all this business is about, is selling papers."
Hearst was lying. There was more to it than just selling newspapers. It was about power. The old establishment succeeded in taking down Arbuckle, but they missed the bigger target.
Today, of course, Hollywood is not that different from the rest of the country. The sexual conduct, attitudes towards personal life in Hollywood are not that different from the rest of the nation. From that point of view, Hollywood won. We've all become Hollywoodized. In the early 1920s, they were worried about the rest of the country being Hollywoodized. That battle's over with. Hollywood has won.
Hollywood's victory came with a price, and it was Roscoe Arbuckle who paid it, big time.
Not only today do people still believe, the general public would believe that Fatty Arbuckle committed a crime, namely the crime of rape, but also that he was convicted of it.
Roscoe Arbuckle will forever be remembered as the man who changed the public image of Hollywood. Whether or not he was guilty, whether or not people throughout history remember him as guilty or not, they will always remember him as the person who put a negative face on the Hollywood celebrity, who turned Hollywood scandal into a buzzword or into a concept that has persisted throughout our culture to the present day.
We can have a terrible injustice in a Hollywood story as long as in the last reel, the wrong is righted and the hero is acclaimed and exonerated. Roscoe Arbuckle was exonerated, but the wrong was never righted. And in fact, we have an injustice that remains to this day.
Arbuckle died in his sleep in a New York hotel room in 1933 at the age of 46. He was the first Hollywood star, writer, and director to achieve complete creative control over his films, and he probably would have gone down alongside Chaplin and Keaton as a comic genius had he not hosted a party where the uninvited guests, a pregnant starlet, a conniving extortionist, and an incompetent doctor, found themselves locked in a dance of death. Every once in a while, a celebrity trial taps into a nation's psyche. The irony is that O.J. Simpson's celebrity protected him, while Arbuckle's star status made him an easy target in a fateful struggle between Hollywood and those who sought to control it. In the battle between the old guard and the new, Roscoe Arbuckle was the last casualty.